Sickle cell disease is an inherited condition, meaning that one gets it from one's parent. It results by having hemoglobin gene, which is referred to as the S gene, from both parents. And what this condition results into is that the red blood cell, which carry oxygen to all parts of the body, they change shape and become sickled, hence the name sickle cell. And these cells can break down easily in the body, leading to a low blood level, which we refer to as anemia. Well, sadly, Nigeria happens to be the sickle cell capital of the world. And this is because 1 out of every 4 Nigerians does carry the sickle cell gene. In addition, over 150,000 babies are born annually in Nigeria with sickle cell disease.
Welcome back to the LUTH Podcast, and joining us today we have a consultant physician hematologist, Dr. Adelabu, who will be helping us deep dive into sickle cell disease and everything about it. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
How was your day?
Very well, thank you.
So, do we have you on board?
Yes.
Okay, so can you briefly explain the science behind sickle cell disease such that Madam Coco in Mushin will be able to understand what it is about?
Okay, thank you very much. So, sickle cell disease is an inherited condition, meaning that one gets it from one's parent. It results by having to inherit the hemoglobin gene, which is referred to as the S gene, from both parents. And what this condition results into is that the red blood cell, which carry oxygen to all parts of the body, they change shape and become sickled, hence the name sickle cell. And these cells can break down easily in the body, leading to a low blood level, which we refer to as anemia. In addition, these blood cells can block the blood flow to some tissues and organs in the body, and thereby can destroy those organs. So simply put, that's what sickle cell is all about.
Okay, so how common is it in Nigeria? I mean, I see a lot of posts going out every time, maybe not every time, about sickle cell disease. How common is it?
Well, sadly, sickle cell disease, Nigeria happens to be the sickle cell capital of the world, sadly.
Interesting.
And this is because 1 out of every 4 Nigerians does carry the sickle cell gene. In addition, over 150,000 babies are born annually in Nigeria with sickle cell disease. Coupled with the fact that Nigeria is the most populous Black nation in the world, that's one reason why sickle cell is very, very common in this part of the world.
So because we are Black now, we are at a higher risk of having sickle cell disease?
Yeah, you could say that in a way, because the gene is quite common in the Black race. And Nigeria being a very populous nation in the world makes sickle cell really very common.
Okay, so sickle cell is something that scares a lot of people in the medical profession, even the non-medical profession. So please, why should we be scared of sickle cell disease? Like, what is the burden? How does sickle cell disease actually affect us that should make us scared of sickle cell disease?
Well, I won't necessarily use the word scared of sickle cell, but it is a condition that carries with it a very huge burden, not only emotionally and psychologically, but in every aspect of the life of those that are living with this condition, because it affects their work, it affects their play, it affects their studies, virtually all aspects of their lives. And it's not only these individuals that get to carry the burden, and also their families, and by extension, the entire society. So it is a huge, problem in this part of the world, which many families are having to grapple with.
So I want you to just describe a brief scenario of how sickle cell itself affects the person who is living with sickle cell disease and those around him, so that our viewers can actually get an insight into how much it actually affects and the key chain events that happen.
Right. So typical scenario I can paint for you would be, let's take a 19-year-old boy who as maybe transitioning between secondary school to university, and having to go through studies in early, for lectures in class, or having to do other study, or even having to study, late night. This condition can, impact significantly the life of such an individual, whereby when they actually come down with pain crisis, they may not be able to even do their regular activities, either having to study or even to play, with friends, whether to play any form of sports, and at instances where there are changes, for example, in the weather. If it's raining, they can't get to, maybe do some activity at that time, because it can trigger crisis and all that for them. Not only that, it might even make them, they might become hospitalized as a result of the crisis, and maybe miss school for a significant chunk of time. And all of this having more emotional and psychological effects on the individuals, making them perhaps not to able to focus on their studies, or even if when they grow older and they get to start working, it may even cause them some financial difficulty as a result of having to lose this out of work, or not able to do things that ordinarily will be financially rewarding for them. So there are so many dimensions and ramifications that this condition can impact someone's life.
Then the family who is also caring for him would also have to be faced with the financial burden, the emotional burden, the sleepless nights along with him, and staying in the hospital up with the person.
Absolutely.
That's very much scary, in my opinion. So, what are the warning signs a person having sickle cell disease? You mentioned that they have crisis. So, how do we know when they start to have crisis, and what should we do?
Thank you very much for that. So, one of the most common type of crisis that people with sickle cell disease usually experience is what we refer to as acute painful, or also known as bone pain crisis. So usually this involves having pain most of the time in the long bones of the body, that is in the limbs, but can also affect the back, or even the ribs. Whenever the pain start developing, gradually, usually there are premonitory signs where one the river would have a feeling that the crisis is already brewing up at that time. Can't really say that any specific signs in quote, but because this usually comes with pain, having to start having like experiencing pain in some part of the body, usually is an admixture of a crisis in an evolution. And so for this, we usually help them to understand their body and know what needs to be done right from the outset of it, before it even gets severe and perhaps needing to go to the hospital.
So, what are the management options available for patients with this condition?
So broadly speaking, I would say that there are four broad treatment options that are available for sickle cell disease generally. The first is the use of medications. There are medications that have been developed to control the disease condition, usually in form of tablet medication. One of them is referred to as Adelabu, and there are several others that have been developed. In addition, they're also giving supportive, or referred to as supportive treatment, medications to help in protecting the blood vessel from being broken down easily, or helping in replacing them, as well as also to either control pain or any of the effects that they may have. So that is the first one, use of medication. The second is a procedure we refer to as exchange blood transfusion. What is done in this particular treatment option is to replace the red blood cell that's sickled with others that are of the normal hemoglobin, so as to prevent most of the complications that can arise from sickle cell disease. So it's by replacing the sickle cell with the normal round red blood cell. The third treatment option is the curative option. It's one of the two curative options, which is stem cell transplantation. In this treatment option, what is done is to replace the blood producing cells in the bone marrow with one from a donor that has a shared similar gene that can produce normal red blood cells that are not sickled. And the last treatment option is what is referred to as gene therapy, where there is a repair of the genetic abnormality that lead to sickle cell disease, thereby allowing the normal red blood cell to be produced. So broadly, these are the four treatment options for sickle cell that are currently available.
Okay, so now in Nigeria, I mean, with all the treatment options you just mentioned, where are we?
I can say that we are to a large extent at par with what is obtainable all over the world. Three of the four treatment options that I just mentioned are currently available in Nigeria. So some of the medication now available for our patients to use. A simple transfusion, even though it is not frequently used, but it's an option that we have available. But the challenge with that is availability of blood products to be able to have the transfusions that is required. Regarding stem cell transplantation, we've also, started that in this part of the world. But for all of these three treatment options I've talked about, the main challenge and the gap they still remain the access to them as well as affordability, of it. So by and large, they are available, but you want to know what percentage or what proportion of those that are living with this condition are able to access and to have this treatment, particularly the curative treatment option that has just recently become available, but it's still out of reach to many Nigerians.
Okay, so just a sneak peek. Can you tell us like how much stem cell transplants cost?
Well, I can't really put a specific figure to it, but what I can say is that it runs into to millions, of naira, and knowing in this part of the world, in a low and middle income setting, and judging by the average economic power of the average Nigeria, this is way out of reach of so many people.
Okay, so you mentioned that it's actually very expensive. I mean, expenses apart, is it really, really accessible everywhere? How is the accessibility like?
Yeah, stem cell transplantation all over the world is an expensive procedure to undertake, even for centers or areas where this has been ongoing for quite some time. And so, because of the peculiar challenges also to have this procedure done in this part of the world, knowing that we basically source for most things outside the country. So that also it has a bearing on the cost. So it is generally an expensive procedure, worldwide because of the various aspects of the things that it entails.
Wow. So, for someone living with sickle cell disease who actually can't afford this treatment, what are the complications that could arise from living with sickle cell disease?
The sickle cell disease is a condition that can virtually affect all parts of the body, from head to toe. One of the common complications in children is a major factor that can lead to stroke in children. It could also affect the vision. It could affect major organs of the body, like changes in the heart, in the kidneys, even in the intestine. And at times, it could also have, issues with their limb. Even it won't just suddenly opening or even without an injury. So sickle cell disease, it can virtually affect all parts of the body because there are manifestations that can be seen in these areas.
So I used to think stroke only affects older people. I mean, I had no idea that sickle cell could lead to stroke in young ones. That's very, very scary. So the common knowledge is that two people who are living with AS, I mean, they said it's a genotype, yes. Could you shed little more light on the genotypes and which one should be avoided in terms of getting married? Because I know that there is one Femi somewhere who is trying to convince Lucy that they can get married and avoid sickle cell disease or something.
Yeah, so that's a very important aspect to look at. For what we know about sickle cell disease and how it's inherited, we know that anyone that carries the traits, meaning has a copy of the abnormal hemoglobin, so there is a possibility that that can be transferred to the offspring. So if there are two individuals, a couple, and each of them has that trait, so there is a possibility that they could have an offspring that has sickle cell disease. And that is why a number of things are usually recommended for such couples. One of the first things to do is for them to undergo what is called genetic counseling. In these sessions, they are educated about the condition, and also they are also enlightened about the options that are available to them in order not to have an offspring that has this condition. So one of the options that's available is what we call prenatal diagnosis, whereby whenever a couple has a conception, they could do some tests to determine what the genotype of the child would be, and based on that, they could decide on what to do regarding that. But other options include assisted reproductive technology, whereby there can be selections of what we call embryo that will be devoid of this. So there are options that are available in terms of avoiding having offsprings with this, but this requires both couple to be well educated about the options and also for them to know what they are going into at that stage.
Okay, so for those who are not yet a couple, like I mentioned earlier, Femi and Lucy, who are still in the courting stages, what genotypes actually can marry each other without leading to sickle cell disease?
Okay. Thank you very much. So the main thing to be on the lookout for is that one of the couple should not have the abnormal hemoglobin. The hemoglobin S is one of the abnormal hemoglobin, but there are others. So if there are two individuals that have at least one of them having the abnormal hemoglobin, then that is what is not recommended, it's not advisable to go ahead with. So, for example, if there are two people that are having the sickle cell trait, AS+AS, there is a possibility they could have offspring that could have sickle cell disease. But if one of them has hemoglobin AA, for example, then regardless of what the genotype of the other individual is, there is almost no possibility of having sickle cell disease because each offspring takes one gene from either parent. So if the particular parent does not have an abnormal hemoglobin, that almost eliminates the chances of having a child with sickle cell disease.
So only AA is like standard right now.
Yeah, because that's the normal hemoglobin type.
So they can marry other people,
Yes,
AS, AC,
practically.
SS, SC.
Sure, yes.
All right. So, thank you so much for starting that with us today, sir. I'd like to ask some rapid questions. So, sir, we have 25 hours in a day. How would you spend the last hour?
I'll spend the
25th
last
hour.
hour reading all
Wow.
through. I can read for 36 hours if possible.
Wow. What kind of literary material?
Anyone,
Fiction?
medical majorly. Fiction, yeah.
All right, sir. So, quick round. Myth or fact? I would say something. You tell me if it's a myth or a fact. So, sickle cell disease only affects children.
Myth.
Okay, people living with sickle cell disease should avoid exercise completely.
Myth.
So, what kind of exercise should they do?
They can do any type of exercise, but of course to know their limit in terms of what their physical strength can be, and not to go overboard.
Drinking water helps prevent crisis.
Myth. Facts.
Okay, so someone can look perfectly healthy and still be living with sickle cell disease.
Facts.
Wow. So, sickle cell pain is sometimes misunderstood or underestimated.
I'll say both, because either way it can be true, and in some other instance because it's individualized. So, but if I'm to go with one, I'll say it's a myth.
Okay, so people living with sickle cell disease can have careers, families, and live full lives.
That's a fact for sure.
Okay, so knowing your genotype today, is that still important?
Yeah, it's super important today. It's a fact.
Right, now for the final one, is there better hope for people that are living with sickle cell disease today in Nigeria?
Yes, there is hope. Like I always say, there is always hope, because in life, one thing that one cannot do to oneself is to lose hope. We say in Nigeria and worldwide generally, the cure of sickle cell disease, is already with us, but there are even prospects at even having a more lasting and long lasting cure. So in the next couple of decades, we should be talking about this condition being absolutely curable in virtually all parts of the world because of advancements in science, medicine, and technology.
Okay, sir. So earlier you mentioned the medications people use, and I've also heard that some people actually abuse substance. People living with sickle cell disease, in particular, they abuse substances just to feel better. Can you enlighten us more about that?
Yeah, so that's one major problem that we do get to encounter in treating people with sickle cell disease. And one of the things that fuel this is because of the frequent painful crises that they do experience and having to be given pain relief medication. Over time, because some of this medication, can lead to changes, particularly in the brain, that can fuel a dependency issue or an addiction to the use of this medication. And in some individuals, this can actually even be more life threatening than the sickle cell disease itself, because not only do they have the possibility of having to overdose, but they could also be involved in dangerous practices like self injection, which, as we're seeing, that led to even the loss of limbs or even severe infection that can be what could be life threatening for them. So it's important, really, in treating this condition to always get to seek and receive medical care, and only to use prescription only medication, as in difference to having to go and procure these medications by oneself, or to use it outside the doctor's recommendation. So this is one main challenge, but it's something that also needs to be addressed.
Thank you very much for answering that. Of all the treatments you mentioned earlier, which one do we actually do here in Lagos University Teaching Hospital?
Okay, so we actually have three of the four treatment options that I've talked about before. The most recent addition to the treatment options that is now available here in LUTH is the stem cell transplantation, also referred to as bone marrow transplantation, which is a curative treatment option for sickle cell disease. And this is something that hitherto wasn't readily available, but now we have it here at the Lagos University Teaching Hospital.
Oh, that means we are moving forward.
Yeah, definitely we're
That's
moving in
very,
the right
very much
direction.
reassuring. All right, so thank you so much for starting us today. And it was actually a very educational session. So before you leave us, I'd like to hear one thing from you. What is one thing you would love to tell Nigerians about sickle cell disease that you think you've not mentioned?
Yeah, one thing I'd like to mention is that aside from sickle cell itself, there are other blood conditions that people should be aware that some are related to
Okay.
sickle cell, some are not. I've come to understand that a lot of people are not aware that there's a type of hemoglobin called hemoglobin C, which an individual can have both hemoglobin S and C. It's still considered as part of the sickle cell, disease, generally. For some, can even have two copies of this abnormal hemoglobin called hemoglobin CC. And
Mm.
the thing about it is that they all behave similarly to hemoglobin S and sickle cell disease. So that's one thing you should know, that when you go to do your genotype test to check what your genotype is, you should also be aware that there are other types of abnormal hemoglobin that could also be seen. So that's something to be aware of, which I think most people are not aware of before now.
Yeah, I wasn't. So, I mean, I have people who are actually living with AC, who their genotypes are actually AC. And the first time I heard it, I thought it was like one cool genotype. Then discovering that it's actually also a risk, I was very much shocked. So thank you so much for joining us today on this episode. It was a really, really wonderful session and I learned a lot. So thank you everyone. Thank you for staying with us until the end.
Thank you for having me. It's my
So
pleasure.
yes, sir. If you enjoyed today's conversation, don't forget to like, comment, and share with your loved ones, and let's reduce the burden of sickle cell disease in Nigeria. Thank you.